The night wind tore across Silver Creek Valley, carrying a long, sharp howl, as though the whole winter was breathing down a man's neck. Against the white sky, the Harding barn cast a faint stripe of light. Inside, Jesse Harding bent over Willow, his hands shaking from cold and from a fear he had hidden for hours. Willow wheezed, her neck swollen, thick strings of drool hanging at her mouth. Strangles, an illness he thought lived only in books, had walked in just as his horses were meant to be delivered to the army at Fort Bowman. Losing Willow meant losing the ranch's lifeline, and losing the last thing Sarah had left behind. He had stayed awake for days, but everything kept slipping. He laid a rough hand on Willow's forehead, trying to keep his own breathing steady. A burst of wind rushed in and killed the lantern flame. Jesse looked up, ready to curse the storm, when he heard footsteps. Light, steady, not hesitant. Someone was coming through a night meant to bury all tracks. The barn door flew open, snow swept in, and with it stood a woman at the threshold. Her cloak was crusted with ice, her dark hair stuck to her cheek in wet strands. Melted snow slid down her collar, yet her face was strangely calm, as if she knew cold better than anyone in town. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, voice roughened by wind. "I saw a light and thought someone was still awake." Jesse didn't answer. Willow dragged in a heavy breath that rocked her whole body. The woman's eyes turned at once, quick, sharp, certain. She stepped inside without waiting, leaned aside to shut the door, her movements clear and unafraid. "The horse has strangles." She spoke as if she'd been standing in that barn all day. Jesse straightened. "You know this illness?" She nodded and moved closer to Willow. When her hand touched the mare's neck, light, almost like asking permission, Willow shivered, then settled. Jesse stared at that hand. Long, a little calloused, steady. Something about the way she touched the horse made him stop breathing. "I can help," she said, "if you'll allow it." She looked at him for the first time. Dark eyes, tired but even. Under the freshly lit lantern, he saw a face worn by a long walk through the storm. "Who are you?" Jesse asked. "Naomi Brooks." The name dropped into the cold air, and even the barn seemed to listen. Her lips trembled from cold. Jesse was about to offer his coat when Willow choked again. Naomi knelt at once, pressed 2 fingers beneath the jawline, tilted her head to hear the breath. Every small movement, swift, precise, never rushed, held Jesse still beside her. "Her airway is closing," she whispered. "We need to open it." "Where did you learn this?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Naomi didn't look up. "Later." One word carrying an entire past she wasn't willing to lay bare. Jesse handed her a clean cloth. When his hand brushed her fingertips, just a moment, the cold in her skin ran straight into his chest. It had been a long time since he touched a hand meant to save instead of remind him of loss. Willow strained for air again. Naomi leaned close, her breath mixing with the mare's warm steam. She stroked the horse once, her voice low and steady, enough to ease even Jesse's own pulse. Outside, the wind screamed on, but inside the barn there were only 3 breaths. Willow's failing, Naomi's focused, and Jesse's pinned to whatever hope this stranger carried. A small sound rose at the door. Ella, the 6-year-old girl who hadn't spoken since her mother died, stood there with wide eyes. She stared at Naomi, then stepped forward and held the soaked edge of her cloak, as if she'd found someone who could pull her out of the fear she lived with. Naomi lowered herself, touched a fingertip to Ella's cheek. A touch as light as a passing draft. yet Ella leaned into it at once. Jessie's throat closed. The child hadn't done that with anyone in 2 years. And right then, while he was still trying to understand what he'd seen, Willow let out one more choking gasp, then stopped breathing. The air iced over. Naomi drew in a deep breath, slid her hand to the right place along the mare's throat. "Hold her head," she said, voice low and firm as iron. "We're not letting her go." And she began the intervention. Willow did not die that night. She didn't recover either. But when dawn slipped in with thin pink lines brushing the barn window, the mare opened her eyes, breathing hard yet steadier. Naomi had stayed by her side through the entire night, her work slow and careful, as though she were stitching together whatever breath the horse had left. Jessie had never seen anyone work like that, enduring without complaint, patient as if the only duty left in the world was to keep Willow alive for a little while longer. When Willow tried to lift her head, Jessie exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "She's strong," Naomi murmured. Her voice brushed the morning light like a soft thread. "Because of you," Jessie said, though his eyes remained on the horse. Naomi shook her head. "Because you cared for her all these years." The words made his shoulders ease. Few people understood that kind of devotion, and even fewer spoke of it with the quiet truth Naomi carried. The danger wasn't over. The whole herd could be infected. While Jessie prepared tools for disinfecting, Naomi had already rolled up her sleeves and moved from stall to stall, checking each horse. Every touch was careful, never fearful, but never reckless. "Hold his head," she said while examining Midnight. When Jessie reached forward, her fingers brushed his wrist, just a brief moment, but enough to send his heartbeat off its familiar rhythm. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. In the mix of hay, horse breath, and cold morning air, that touch was wordless yet heavier than most spoken things. "It's not severe yet," Naomi said, tilting her head toward Midnight. "He needs isolation a few more days." Jessie nodded. "I owe you more than I can say." "No," she replied, still focused. "You're only letting me do what I know." The light caught her cheek, revealing the exhaustion she had tried to hide. She hadn't slept at all, yet kept working as though her hands were the only place she could stand firm. Ella barely left her side. The child who hid in corners whenever strangers came now followed Naomi as if the woman were the safe shadow she'd been waiting for. Naomi never forced her to speak. She simply kept the girl close, resting a hand on Ella's head whenever the child leaned into her coat. Small gestures that seemed like nothing. Yet for Ella, they were the first anchor she'd known in years. Jessie watched from a distance, a warm ache rising in his chest, like remembering something lost, only to find a small living piece of it again. By afternoon, the wind had softened. Naomi sat on the wooden step outside the barn, rubbing her wrist after a full day's work. Jessie brought a thick coat and set it on her shoulders. Naomi stiffened slightly, looking toward the snow-covered ridge instead of at him. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. When she drew the coat closer, her hand brushed the back of his, cold and dry, but enough to quiet him for a few heartbeats. "Why were you out in the storm last night?" he asked. Naomi pressed her lips together. For the first time, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't calm, but fear. A fear held so tightly that it trembled the moment it was touched. "I couldn't stay in my old town," she said, the words breaking in places. "Tobias Whitlock, the richest apothecary owner, wanted to force me to marry him. He used my family's debts to trap me. Jesse didn't interrupt. He sat beside her, his hands loose on his knees, steady as an old tree shielding the wind. Naomi tightened her fingers. I ran. Didn't take anything. Only took my life with me. The words sounded strong, but the end bent like a branch held upright for too long. A few townsfolk passed nearby, their glances sharp with suspicion. They whispered, a black woman, too skilled, too sure of herself. Trust would never come easily in Silver Creek. Naomi lowered her face into her hands. I know they don't trust me. It's the same everywhere. Jesse looked at her for a long moment, not searching for answers, only seeing someone carrying herself to the point of breaking. Naomi, he said quietly, almost a call carried on the wind. Do you have anywhere else to go? She lifted her head. Her dark eyes held a sorrow so deep, the storm outside seemed warm in comparison. No, she whispered. One word, but enough for Jesse to feel her whole world balancing on that moment. Fragile, unsteady, waiting for someone to hold it still. And he understood. There was no one left for her but this place. Morning settled over the fences like a thin shawl of mist. Jesse stood on the porch post, watching Naomi check Willow's temperature under the pale sunlight. Ella stayed close beside her, a small hand gripping the hem of Naomi's coat, as if letting go meant the wind might steal her away. Naomi bent to adjust the child's scarf. A small gesture, but to Jesse, it was the gentlest light the ranch had seen since Sarah died. When Naomi stepped out of the barn, Jesse called to her. He didn't speak yet. He only handed her a metal cup still steaming. She took it with both hands, warmth rising into her cold, purple fingertips. Naomi, he began, voice low as earth. If you stay like this, Whitlock will come. She looked into the cup, not at him. I know, but I have nowhere else. Jesse drew a slow breath, as if the choice had lived inside him since the night before, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. You can stay here, he said, legally, as husband and wife. Naomi's hands jerked, her breath catching, but her eyes didn't show fear, only a deep, worn caution toward fate itself. You don't have to. It's not pity, Jesse cut in, calm but firm. It's the only way to keep you safe from him. And Ella, she needs you. Naomi looked across the snow-covered field. Wind traced pale circles through the drifts. For a moment, Jesse couldn't tell whether she was thinking of Whitlock, the long road she fled, or a future with no name yet. At last, she nodded. Slow, fragile, but enough to change both their lives. The small ceremony took place that afternoon. Just the minister, a neighbor as witness, Jesse, Naomi, and Ella. The winter sun hung still over the sky, casting a faint gold across their joined hands. Ella never let go of Naomi. Each time the minister spoke, the girl pressed closer, as if making sure Naomi wasn't leaving. Jesse slid the ring onto Naomi's finger. His hand was still rough, but in that moment, when his skin touched hers, he felt himself risking a part of his heart he thought had frozen long ago. His fingers trembled. Naomi noticed. She said nothing. She simply breathed. A soft, accepting breath. They did not share a room. Jesse cleaned the small guest room that once belonged to Sarah. The air still held the scent of pine wood, and the faded memory of dried flowers left in the old vase. Naomi stood at the doorway a long while, as if she could hear another woman's life lingering in the quiet. Jesse didn't step inside. He set the key on the table and stepped back. "If you need anything, I'm right across the hall." Naomi nodded. The door closed, leaving a space between them, close enough to hear each other's footsteps, far enough to breathe. The next morning, Naomi began tending the barn. She hauled old straw outside, burned the infected piles, scrubbed troughs with hot, salted water, hung herb satchels to dry the air and cleanse the smell. Her method was so precise Jesse caught himself watching more than once, wanting to ask where she learned it, but stopping, as if the question might touch a part of her she wasn't ready to open. Townsfolk passing by glanced toward her. They paused long enough to see she wasn't someone who bent easily, but not long enough to abandon suspicion. A black woman that's skilled. A stranger suddenly married to Jesse Harding. Someone they didn't understand, yet couldn't ignore. Rumors rose like thin smoke against the winter sky. Naomi kept working. Jesse watched from behind the barn door with an expression no one else noticed. Part gratitude, part caution, part quiet waiting. Late in the afternoon, as Naomi walked toward the well with a bucket, Jesse heard unfamiliar hooves stop at the gate. A man in a low-brimmed hat asked one question to a passerby. "Is there anyone here named Naomi Brooks?" The winter wind cut colder than before. Jesse stood still. That name, spoken aloud, sliced through the fragile peace they had built. And he knew someone had followed her tracks. News of the stranger spread through town like a cold wind no one saw but everyone felt. No one remembered his name, but the question he left behind stayed on every tongue. "Is there anyone here named Naomi Brooks?" When Jesse repeated it, Naomi froze on the doorstep, still holding the heavy bucket of water. For one heartbeat, she couldn't hide her fear. A faint tremble at her eyelids, a breath pulled so tight Jesse could hear it. "Whitlock," she whispered, barely loud enough for herself. The name, even unfinished, tightened the whole yard like a fist. In the days that followed, Naomi never slept more than 2 hours. Jesse knew because he heard her shifting each time he passed the hall. The dim lamp in her room barely went out. If a distant hoofbeat or a rattling window stirred the night, Naomi startled awake. She didn't speak. Jesse didn't ask. But every morning when she walked toward the barn with hollow eyes, he stood beside her, silent, steady, like a wall meant to remind her she wasn't alone. Inside, the wind whistled through the boards. Naomi was adjusting a bundle of herbs when her sleeve snagged on a bent iron hook. She turned to free it, but it only caught tighter. Jesse stepped in without a word. His fingers touched her wrist, warmth moving through the thin fabric. Naomi stilled. "Let me," Jesse said quietly, almost a breath. They stood close enough to hear each other's heartbeat. Something flickered in Naomi's eyes, a current of fear, but a thin thread of trust woven into it. When the metal hook slipped free, her hand slid lightly into his palm. Only a moment, soft as dust falling, but enough to make her pull away a touch faster than needed. Jesse didn't comment. He stepped back so she could breathe. But his gaze stayed on her, carrying an unspoken vow. Even if Whitlock came, he would not let her stand alone. Silver Creek still didn't know what to make of her. Some had begun to respect her, especially after hearing she saved Willow. But others, held tight by old patterns, remained wary of a black woman, a stranger who had somehow become Jesse Harding's wife. They watched her when she walked through the market, Naomi felt it every time she pulled her scarf tighter around her face. Jessie stayed close, yet knew there were wounds no hand could shield. Only time and steady kindness could mend them. Ella was the only one untouched by doubt. She followed Naomi like a small shadow, asking about horses, herbs, and everything in between. And each time the girl took her hand, Naomi felt herself stand a little surer. One evening, as dusk fell over the barn roof, Marshal Dixon rode up. His face was heavy as first winter wind. "Jessie," he called, "I need to speak with both of you." Naomi stepped out, fingers laced together. Dixon removed his hat, his voice dropping low, as if softening the blow he carried. "Whitlock is in town." The air froze. Naomi clutched her coat. Jessie gripped his saddle strap until his knuckles whitened. "What did he say?" Dixon exhaled. "He went straight to my office. Claimed you stole from him. Money, goods. Said you ran off from Chicago. He wants Montana law to return her to him." Naomi's hand went to her chest as if the words had cut through. Dixon held her gaze, firm, not cold. "I haven't given him an answer. But he has papers. Documents Whitlock calls proof of your debts. He says he'll file them in the morning." Jessie stepped close to Naomi, half a pace that made his stance clear. She was under his protection. "Marshal," Jessie said slowly, "he doesn't lay a hand on her." Dixon nodded. "I'll follow the law. But Naomi, you need to come in tomorrow. We have to hear what he presents." Naomi nodded, her throat tight. When Dixon rode away, the wind swept across the yard, stirring the loose straw. Naomi stood as if rooted in place. Jessie touched her shoulder. "You're not facing this alone," he said. Naomi closed her eyes, her breath breaking. But before his words could reach fully inside her, the distant clatter of wheels echoed, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. A city carriage. Whitlock had come to Silver Creek, and tomorrow he would bring what he believed was evidence. Silver Creek wore a pale gray morning, the fog hanging low enough to touch. Naomi walked beside Jessie, her hands cold and purple, yet her back stayed straight as she tried to hide the tremor beneath her shawl. Ella followed, clutching a handful of Naomi's coat, as if afraid she would disappear the moment she let go. The marshal's office door stood slightly open, warm light spilling across the damp street. And inside, before the desk, stood Whitlock. He turned just as Naomi stepped through. His smile never reached his eyes, a practiced curve of a man used to bending truth with money. "Naomi Brooks," Whitlock said, voice tight with triumph. "Finally found you." Naomi froze, fingers tightening on her coat. Jessie stepped forward at once, standing between them, solid enough that she could see nothing but his back shielding her. Marshal Dixon surveyed the three of them, arms crossed, voice heavy as stone. "We go by the law here. Whitlock, speak." Whitlock laid a stack of papers on the table, contracts, debt notes, and a few forged documents he believed convincing. "I want her returned to Chicago. She stole money, fled her debts, stole goods from my shop. Here's the proof." Dixon flipped through them, his brow tightening, not in belief, but because something didn't fit. "Miss Brooks," Dixon said, "do you have anything to say?" Naomi opened her mouth, but no words came. Sleepless nights, years of running, the fear that her voice would always weigh less than a wealthy white man's. Everything closed her throat. Jessie rested a gentle hand on her back, light enough not to force speech, steady enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Naomi drew in a breath, slow and thin, then lifted her head. "I didn't take anything," she said. Her voice strained but steady. "He held my parents with debt. I worked for him. No pay, no choice, no freedom." Whitlock laughed, a harsh metallic sound cutting through the room. "You weave a fine tale. I have papers right here." Dixon slapped one of the documents against the desk. "This says you owe $300 for medicine. But the signature," he leaned closer, "doesn't match hers on the marriage certificate recorded here." Jessie glanced at Naomi. She lowered her head, but the corner of her mouth trembled. For the first time, someone had cared enough to notice her signature. Dixon went on. "Whitlock, you understand false testimony before a marshal is an offense? I could put you in Montana jail tonight." Whitlock's face drained, then tightened. "She belongs to me under debt law. I have the right." Dixon slammed his hand on the desk, hard enough to silence him. "No one owns anyone in Silver Creek, and she is a legal citizen here, the wife of Jesse Harding." For the first time, the word wife rang not as a formality, but as a shield. Naomi staggered, knees buckling. Jessie caught her immediately. She leaned into him on instinct, breath sharp, heart pounding like a drum. The scent of leather and pine from Jessie's coat wrapped around her, grounding her in a safety she hadn't felt in months. She didn't cry, but her forehead rested against his chest in a small surrender to the weight she'd been carrying. Outside the window, the whole town watched. For the first time, they saw not a stranger being hunted, but a woman standing against a lifetime of shadows, with a man beside her like bedrock. Whitlock lurched to his feet. "I refuse this. I'll take it to the Montana court." Dixon shrugged. "Do as you please. But if you harass her again, I'll be the one putting you behind bars. Clear?" Whitlock shot Naomi a last look, spiteful, poisonous, then stormed out, his boots striking the floor in sharp blows. When the door slammed shut, Naomi nearly collapsed. Jessie held her steady. "It's over," he whispered. For a moment, she didn't believe it. Then something warm and unfamiliar spread in her chest. Ella ran inside without a word. She wrapped her arms around Naomi's legs, then looked up with eyes that had stayed silent through grief. A hesitant breath, a trembling hand lifted from her own heart to Naomi's, and then, in a room quiet as a chapel, "Mama, Naomi." The first word she'd spoken, small but enough to make the whole world stop. That night, when the town had gone dark and only the wind curled through the pines, Naomi sat on the bench by the kitchen window. The oil lamp flickered, laying soft gold across her face. Ella slept already, her expression peaceful, as if the words "Mama Naomi" had unlocked something long sealed within her. But Naomi couldn't sleep. Her hand rested lightly over her chest, where her heart still beat unevenly after facing Whitlock. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there. Outside, the snow kept falling, each flake tapping the roof like a whisper from a world shifting into place. Jesse appeared in the doorway without a sound. He stood there for a moment, looking at Naomi's back as though he were looking at a question he'd held since the night she stepped out of the storm. Then he walked toward her, so quietly the lamp's glow was the only sign of his approach. "You're cold," Jessie murmured, setting a warm cloth around her shoulders. Naomi startled slightly, but when she saw him, her body eased, His eyes held no pressure, no demand, only a steady kindness that made her want to hide and stay in the same breath. "Thank you," she whispered. Jessie pulled a chair beside her, the distance between them no more than a breath. Ella hasn't spoken to anyone in 2 years, but today, she chose you. Naomi lowered her gaze. "I don't think I deserve that." Jessie cut in with a touch so light it barely brushed her skin, his fingertip grazing the back of her hand. It was enough to make her look up. "You deserve it," he said slowly. "More than anyone." Something inside Naomi fell quiet at those words. She didn't cry, but her eyes softened, as if someone had finally touched the part of her she'd kept locked away. "Jessie, why are you so good to me?" He held her gaze for a long moment, weighing each breath before answering. "Because I want to be. Because from the day you walked onto this ranch, I saw something. A light you don't see in yourself." Naomi turned away, emotion trembling through her fingers. Jessie noticed. He took her hand, warm, steady, slow enough to give her room to pull away. She didn't. She let him hold it, letting warmth seep into years of loneliness. Her voice was barely a breath. "I've never had a place to belong." Jessie leaned in slightly, his forehead brushing her temple. "You have a place here, if you want it." It wasn't a grand promise. It wasn't meant to impress. But for Naomi, it was the first proof of something she'd never dared believe. Safety. They sat in long silence, the fire crackling, snow falling steady outside. Then Naomi looked up at Jessie, close enough to see the lines of fatigue on his face, and something warm waiting beneath it. "Jessie, if I said that I feel it too." He didn't let her finish. His hand lifted to her face, a touch light as breath, careful not to break the fragile moment. Naomi held, still. Then Jessie leaned in and kissed her, gentle, cautious, as if asking, "Will you let me into your heart?" Naomi answered with the rare, steady honesty she kept for no one else. No rush, no insistence. Only two souls finding space to breathe. Jessie rose and offered his hand. Naomi paused just a heartbeat, long enough to feel safe, long enough to know she wasn't running anymore, then placed her hand in his. In the quiet room at the end of the hall, they lay beside each other for the first time. There was no wild urgency, only the closeness of shared breath, their hands entwined beneath the warm quilt. Jessie's arm wrapped around her waist, gentle as if holding something precious. Naomi rested her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm she wanted to return to again and again. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she drifted into sleep, not from exhaustion, but from peace. As her thoughts faded into darkness, Naomi whispered, soft as breath, "I won't run anymore." Spring came to Silver Creek not with cheers, but with slow lines of melting ice along the barn roof and the scent of damp earth rising from thin patches of grass. Each morning, Jenna, the frailest horse in the herd, stepped closer to Naomi, as if she recognized the woman who had helped Willow survive the illness no one thought curable. One early morning, Jessie leaned on the rail, watching Naomi and Ella check each horse. Their breaths lifted like smoke in the first light, while Naomi spoke to the animals in a soft way that seemed to reach whatever discomfort lay inside their bodies. "Her skin's warmer than yesterday," Ella whispered. Naomi nodded, placing a hand on the mare's forehead. That means she's healing. See? Every body needs time to recover. Same as people. Jessie listened, wondering whether Naomi knew she was speaking about herself. Rumors of the herd's recovery spread fast, and a month later, the army sent a new inspection team. The stern captain walked through the barn, feeling each joint, checking teeth, noting everything. When he finished, he closed his ledger and studied Naomi for a long moment. "I've never seen a herd in better condition anywhere in Montana," he said. "Miss Brooks, I hear you trained in veterinary work in Chicago?" Naomi didn't boast. She only gave a small nod. "I'd like to hire you as a consulting veterinarian for Fort Bowman. We need people who know what they're doing." Naomi froze. Jessie looked at her. Her eyes didn't brighten with pride. They deepened, as if she was trying to believe she deserved such words. "You can refuse, of course," the captain added. "But I hope you'll consider it." Naomi rested a hand on Ella's shoulder, as though steadying herself. "I'll think about it." Jessie knew that meant she was too stunned to breathe. The changes didn't stop there. Ella, once silent from grief, now talked enough to fill every mealtime. Some days she stood in the kitchen explaining horse anatomy to Naomi, or how to tell which horse liked to be scratched behind the ears. "See?" Naomi said while fixing the child's tangled hair. "You never lost your voice. You just needed a place you trusted." Ella smiled and clung to her hand. Jessie, watching from the table, felt a quiet relief he hadn't dared hope for in years. One afternoon, Jessie led Naomi to the pasture to teach her proper riding technique. She could ride, but always avoided it, as though fear from Chicago still clung to her whenever she approached a saddle. "Sit straight," Jessie said, standing beside the horse. "Trust it. It'll feel that trust." Naomi swallowed. If it runs too fast, I'm here," Jessie said. "You don't have anything to fear." She placed her foot in the stirrup, climbing up carefully. But the saddle slipped slightly on a thin layer of mud, throwing her off balance. In one sudden moment, she tipped forward, straight into Jessie's arms. His chest caught her completely. Pine and sunlight clung to his coat. Jessie held her 1 second longer than necessary. They were close, breaths mingling. Naomi looked down, avoiding his eyes, but her chest rose in a rush of something new. "I'm fine," she murmured. "I know," Jessie said, though his hand remained firm at her waist, steady as a quiet promise. Silver Creek noticed everything: the healthy herd, the ranch reborn, and Naomi, a full presence in a land that seldom welcomed strangers. One Sunday morning, while Naomi washed her veterinary tools near the barn, a group of townsfolk approached, led by Clara Whitmans. "Naomi," Clara said, hands clasped, "we wanted to speak with you." Naomi set her tools down, her heart tightening, still used to bracing herself whenever the community called her name. Clara smiled. "We think Silver Creek needs a proper veterinary clinic. Would you consider opening one of your own? We'll help." Naomi stood still. Water dripped from her hands to the ground, mixing with the last of the morning dew. She couldn't speak. Her eyes widened as if she'd heard something that didn't belong in her world. News that Naomi should open a clinic spread faster than she expected. Within a week, people began knocking on the ranch door every morning, bringing wood, paint, curtain fabric, even nails still warm with the smell of new steel. No one said much. They simply came, set their offerings down, and left, as if they had all silently agreed that this woman, the one who had fought for every life in the herd, deserved a place of her own. Clara Whitman led the women of town, sleeves rolled high, her flowered hat tilting to one side. "We'll build the clinic on the east lot, near the creek. It's bright, clean, and easy to find." Hearing that, Naomi felt something old inside her peel away, revealing a softness she hadn't shown in years. She tried to smile her thanks, but the words wouldn't form, her throat too small to carry everything she felt. For years, she'd been seen as a debtor, a runaway, someone unworthy of standing beside people with status. But here, Silver Creek, a town she hadn't planned to call home, was gathering what little they had for her. Not out of pity, but trust. When the wooden sign reading Brooks Veterinary Clinic went up, Naomi stood before it, her hands trembling so much she couldn't touch the carved surface. Her eyes shimmered, then broke open like an underground spring finally finding air. She cried, silent but fierce in the kind of tears held back through years of living in shadows. Jesse saw her from a distance and walked to her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask her to explain. He simply wrapped his arms around her, slow, steady, deep. Naomi leaned into him fully, her face against his chest, listening to the firm beat of his heart. Her body trembled, but her breath began to settle, as if she were relearning how to trust human kindness. "You deserve this," Jesse murmured, low enough the wind couldn't steal it away. "You've given this place more than you know." Naomi didn't answer, but she pressed a little closer, an unspoken surrender from a heart forged by fear and endurance. The clinic was finished just as bad news arrived. One afternoon, when sunlight stretched long across the pasture, a rancher from the north rode in, pale and frantic. "Miss Brooks, my bull, he can't stand." Jesse looked at Naomi, his eyes asking, "Can you do this?" Naomi nodded, letting courage carry her forward once more. When they arrived, the bull lay on its side, breathing hard, white foam mixing with mucus along its mouth. The smell of illness, fear, and the owner's breaking heart filled the air, things Naomi had faced 100 times, but never grown used to. She knelt beside the bull, hand on its flank, feeling the slow, weakening rise and fall. "I need hot water," she said to Jesse, "and the brown bottle from the leather satchel." Jesse ran as if his own life depended on it. Naomi rolled up her sleeves, wiping the mucus from the bull's nose, massaging to open the airway, checking the lymph nodes, listening to the lungs. Sweat clung to her hair, but her eyes never left the animal. Night fell cold and heavy, but Naomi kept working. Jesse stayed close, never interfering, but a steady light in the chaos. When the rancher collapsed in tears, Naomi placed a hand on his shoulder. "We have time. I'll stay the night. He hasn't given up yet." Jesse draped his coat over her shoulders, a quiet promise that he would stay awake beside her. In the dim lantern glow, Naomi administered medicine, massaged the bull's chest each time its breath faltered. Every small groan drove her to work harder, as if she were trying to save not just an animal, but the part of her life torn away by men like Whitlock. Near midnight, the bull's breaths grew heavier. Its body trembled. Naomi placed both hands on its side, eyes wide, following every broken rise of the ribs. "No, not now," she whispered. Jesse knelt beside her, placing a firm hand on her back to keep her steady when her body nearly folded under the strain. The bull's breath stopped. 1 beat. 2. The air froze, unmoving as winter frost. The bull jerked once, hard, then its chest went still. Naomi stared, holding her breath, not yet knowing whether she was witnessing life or the moment it slipped away. For a long moment, the bull's breath went silent. So long Naomi felt the air leave her own body. But just as she set her hands on its chest for one final compression, a deep shudder rose from its throat. Then a long, dragging breath followed, heavy, strained, but undeniably alive. Naomi dropped her hands, collapsing with exhaustion. The rancher fell to his knees beside the bull, his shaking hands covering his face. Jesse caught Naomi when her legs buckled, holding her upright. "You did it," he whispered. Naomi didn't speak, but when she saw the bull lift its head, its eyes still foggy but no longer lost, something stirred inside her, a quiet rebirth for the animal and for herself. 3 days later, the bull stood again and ate on its own. The news spread across the region like a change of wind. Silver Creek was small, but the tale of a black woman saving a bull, often the most valuable creature on a ranch, traveled far beyond the town's borders. Before the new clinic, letters piled so quickly Jesse had to make a second mailbox. Each morning, Naomi stood there, hands smelling of liniment, staring at the stack as if she were looking at something that didn't belong to her, an honor she'd long believed she didn't deserve. There were letters from a veterinary school in San Francisco, a request for an article from Animal Medicine West, a military offer to train soldiers in disease control across Wyoming. Every envelope carried her name, Naomi Brooks, written as if, for the first time, it was meant to respect, not restrain her. One afternoon, Jesse found Naomi standing alone behind the clinic, surrounded by crates of new supplies. She held a letter half open, unable to continue reading. Her face wasn't sad. It held the quiet confusion of someone unused to being valued so clearly. "I'm not used to people believing in me," she admitted when Jesse approached. He stood at her side, not touching the letter, but touching the heart beneath it with a gentle truth. "It isn't them who started believing," he said. "It's that you never gave yourself the right to." Naomi looked up, her eyes no longer guarded. Now, when Jesse set a hand on her back, she didn't step away. She let him pull her into his arms, a hold not meant to soothe, but to affirm. "You belong here, and this place belongs to you." Ella grew by the day, in step with the ranch and the clinic's revival. One afternoon, as Naomi cleaned the stall for 2 newborn foals, Ella appeared clutching a thick notebook. She set it on the table with surprising seriousness. "I want to study like you," Ella said. "I want to be a veterinarian." Naomi froze. Then she knelt and wrapped her arms around Ella, not tight, but delicately, as if lifting something precious and fragile. "You'll be better than me," she whispered into the girl's hair. "I believe that." From the doorway, Jesse watched with a look he never thought he would wear again, a look meant for a real family. Summer came, and Naomi's clinic became the center of the region. Folks brought injured animals, weak horses, sick flocks. Naomi worked from dawn to dusk, never complaining. Whenever she grew tired, she stepped outside to watch Jesse and Ella in the pasture, guiding a young colt through its first steps. It was what she called life giving its answer back. She didn't need fame, or to be a known figure in her field. She only needed to work, and to be loved, in the place where she finally belonged. But reputation found her anyway. Letters stacked high, relentless as prairie wind. One hot summer afternoon, dust carried by a distant rider drifted toward the clinic. Naomi heard the metal mailbox give a sharp clink as more mail dropped inside. She barely paid attention until Jesse walked in holding a single envelope. "Naomi," he said, voice lower than usual. "You got a letter from Chicago." Naomi went still, as if someone had set a block of ice against her chest. Jesse held the envelope out, his eyes fixed on her face, ready to catch whatever emotion might break loose. Naomi took it with both hands. The handwriting was familiar. Tobias Whitlock's. Her heart tightened. Naomi stood frozen in the heat of late afternoon, the letter trembling in her grip. No one knew whether it held a threat or an apology, only that her past had arrived at the doorstep of the future she was building. Naomi held the letter for long minutes before she found the courage to open it. Everything she had run from, fear, pursuit, the shadow of Whitlock, seemed to stand behind her, waiting to see what she would do with a thin white envelope. Jesse didn't speak. He stood beside her, one hand holding hers, not tight, but steady, as if his grip kept each trembling beat of her fingers from slipping away. Naomi opened the letter. Whitlock's handwriting was still sharp and cold, but the words showed the crack of a man who no longer held power. "Catherine, I am not writing to demand anything. I apologize." Naomi paused, breath dropping as if the ground had been taken out from under her. "The investigation in Chicago ruined my name. I have sold the shop and left the city. I will go to California, to my sister, somewhere no one cares about my mistakes. Consider everything released, including you. I regret losing the last good thing I ever had, but I did. I won't return. T. Whitlock." When Naomi folded the letter, her hands were so cold she could barely feel them. Jesse tightened his hold, anchoring the part of her that felt ready to collapse under the weight of unnamed emotions. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Naomi couldn't answer at once. She leaned into his chest, letting his warmth dissolve the chill left by every word. The years of threat, pressure, and being treated like someone's possession surged up in her. But then, another feeling came. A release. Not victory, but an ending. A circle closed. In the days that followed, the ranch grew busy preparing for a Christmas gathering to thank the community. The whole town decided to hold it at the Harding Ranch, the place where everything had begun that year. The healings, the snowbound nights, the revival of the herd, and Naomi's own return to herself. Mrs. Clara brought wreaths woven with pine. Tom Bradley delivered lanterns to hang along the beams. Mrs. Chen prepared her roast chicken. Naomi stood among them all, still surprised that people truly saw her as part of this larger family. Ella ran around with colored paper for cutting snowflakes. Every so often she wrapped her arms around Naomi's leg before racing off again, as if checking that Naomi was still there, still theirs. Naomi smiled and rested her hand on Ella's head. "You've grown so much." Ella looked up, eyes bright in the firelight. "I want to help you with the horses today, too." "This afternoon," Naomi said gently. One afternoon, as Naomi checked the last of a healed foal's fever scars, the mail carrier arrived with an envelope thicker than usual. The ink was bold, the seal raised. Chicago Veterinary Society. Naomi opened it, eyes steady on the formal lines. "We are honored to inform you. Invite you to become an honorary member of the Chicago Veterinary Society. In recognition of your significant contributions to veterinary practice in the Western Territories, Despite previous policies excluding women, your case is an exceptional one. Naomi went still. A place that once denied her, told her women had no place among veterinarians, now invited her back. Not asking forgiveness, but offering recognition. She gripped the letter and exhaled, not from weariness, but because her heart had opened another door. A door she thought locked forever. That evening, with the smell of early snow on the wind, Naomi stepped onto the porch where Jesse worked on the lantern strings. His eyes caught the flicker of light and turned toward her. Naomi stopped a few steps away. "Jesse, I need to tell you something." He faced her, studying her closely, sensing the shift in her breath long before she spoke. She walked closer, stopping directly before him, the distance of someone about to say something that mattered beyond work or duty. The letter trembled in her hand. Naomi looked at Jesse, her eyes deeper and more layered than ever before. "I've been thinking about our future, and I've made a decision." Winter thinned layer by layer, leaving brown earth breathing mist under the early sun. Behind Naomi's clinic, the grass began to turn, and with it came something new, the first veterinary lessons she ever taught. Naomi was not someone who sought a crowd, yet when she spoke of animals, of what could save them or harm them, her voice steadied and grew clear. Jesse set up wooden benches by the fence to make an outdoor classroom. At first, only Ella and two young men from town, Ben and Thomas, showed up. A few weeks later, two women from a western ranch came. Then a handful of curious children. Naomi smiled at the unexpected number. She wasn't used to being looked to. But each face carried trust. Trust born from the bull she had saved and the way that story spread across their corner of the West. Ella sat in the front row with the thick notebook Naomi had given her. She wrote every word as if afraid to lose a single detail. Each time Naomi leaned down to check, Ella smiled, small, bright as dew on morning grass. Ben and Thomas watched as Naomi demonstrated proper bandaging, how to read fever signs, how to clean stalls to protect foals from sickness. They copied her movements, awkward but earnest. Naomi repeated each step patiently, sometimes guiding their wrists with a touch so light it felt like breath. Jesse stood by the fence, silent. There was something in his eyes, something only men who have lost too much understand. A quiet pride so deep even the prairie wind slowed as it passed. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched Naomi teach with the same focus she once gave only to sick horses. And he realized, love lived not only in saving each other, but in tending something larger together. One misty morning, Naomi led the class into the main barn for health checks. Light filtered through the boards, turning her hair into thin, shining strands. Ella followed close, curious and eager. Ben asked if she planned to open a second clinic in the next town. Thomas asked whether she'd accept the Army's offer to teach in Colorado. Naomi paused, as if measuring her own heartbeat. "Family is the root," she said slowly, "and work is the wings. But wings only fly when the roots hold." Ella looked up at her mother, eyes glowing. Jesse heard the words from behind and felt something tighten in his chest, something like gratitude. Naomi no longer had to run. Later that day, Naomi taught Ella how to hear a horse's heartbeat through a stethoscope. Ella tilted her head, eyes wide with wonder. "How do you know it's all right?" she asked. Naomi knelt beside her, guiding Ella's hand to the horse's chest. "You don't just listen with your ears," she said. "You listen with your hands and with your heart." Ella smiled. In that moment, Naomi saw her younger self, the girl who loved animals enough to endure anything for them, alive in her daughter. Jessie watched from the doorway, nearly moved enough to kneel and thank heaven for bringing Naomi here, in the right way, at the right time. At sunset, the family gathered on the porch. Naomi blew across her cup of tea. Jessie sat beside her, his arm resting behind her, a steady wall at her back. Ella leaned against their knees, playing with Naomi's stethoscope. Naomi looked at them, feeling her life widen, not through glory, but through meaning. She no longer needed to be a famous veterinarian. Her work was already great enough, but not greater than what she was growing. A new generation, a community learning kindness, and a family warm enough to be home to everything she once feared losing. Jessie turned to her. "It's time Ella knows the whole story," he said. Naomi paused, her heart tightening. Jessie held her gaze, not asking permission, but standing with her. "I want to tell her, all of it, even your past." Evening light crossed Naomi's face, where calm and worry met, signaling a long night about to open. Another year slipped by, light as the breath of an old winter giving way to a new one. The wind on Harding Ranch still carried the scent of dry grass and thin snow, but it no longer tasted of loneliness the way it once had when Naomi first arrived. The land had healed, the horses had healed, and Naomi's own life had risen into its gentle new rhythm. The ranch was now twice its old size. The north barn had been rebuilt to house 2 new breeding horses. Naomi's clinic glowed most nights, not because of chaos, but because of the trust the townspeople placed in her. And the family of 3, Naomi, Jessie, and Ella, had become something none of them said aloud, but all of them felt easily. A real home, in the truest, rarest sense adulthood ever grants. Ella was older now, steadier, laughing more often. She followed Naomi into the clinic every weekend, memorizing every bottle of medicine, every symptom, every strange rhythm of a horse's breath. Each time Naomi looked over, Ella smiled, the smile of a child who knows she is walking the path her heart was shaped for. Jessie, after years of living only with work and an old grief, had become a man who saw life with a wider gaze. Every morning when Naomi stepped onto the porch, he would look up. A quiet gratitude, not spoken, but felt so clearly Naomi sensed it along her spine. That Christmas Eve, the snow arrived early. The flakes brushed Naomi's cheeks as she and Jessie hung the last strand of lantern lights across the beams of the big barn. The soft gold glow washed over the snow, turning it warm as breath. The whole community gathered. The adults brought pies and warm cider. Children ran toward Ella to see the decorations she had made. Jessie set up a long wooden table. On it, Naomi laid the last wreath, the one she and Ella had woven together. When everyone was present, Clara cleared her throat and asked for the family of Dr. Naomi to step forward. Naomi still wasn't used to hearing those words, but Ella tugged her hand, and Jessie's palm settled lightly against her back. Ella climbed onto a small stool Thomas had placed nearby. Then she turned to Naomi, hands hidden behind her. "I have a gift for you, Mama," Ella said, voice small but echoing in the wooden barn. Naomi froze. Jessie looked at her, eyes already shining. Ella held out the gift, a drawing she had made herself. A simple picture, childlike, but full of feeling. In it, the barn was covered in snow, and a black woman stepped through the doorway, holding the lead rope of a sick horse, Willow. In the corner, Ella had written in round letters, "The day you walked into the barn was the day I got a mother." Naomi pressed her hand to her mouth, not to hide tears, but to keep her heart from breaking open in front of everyone. Jesse stepped closer, standing behind her. He didn't embrace her. He just placed his hand on her arm. But in that moment, it felt like the whole world was alone, steady beneath her feet. Naomi knelt and pulled Ella into her arms. Her face sank into the little girl's hair, still smelling of winter wind. And all the years of fear, running, and pain seemed to melt into that small warmth. Later, when the crowd began to drift home, Jesse stood in the barn, head bowed slightly, as if preparing to pray. Naomi came to stand beside him without a word. He laced his fingers with hers, a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of his whole life. "I'm not asking for anything in the new year," Jesse said quietly, eyes on the snow-covered ground. "I just want to say, thank you." Naomi turned, her eyes soft as snow settling onto skin. "Thank you," Jesse went on, "for coming, for living, for healing things I thought only death could finish." Naomi didn't answer. She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his breath fold into the wind. When everyone had gone, Naomi looked around the barn, the place of their first storm, and now the beginning of every calm. She squeezed Jesse's hand. He squeezed back. Outside, snow fell slowly, like blessings. And the story of a woman who spent half her life running, only to find herself on a faraway western plain, closed on one quiet sentence. Healing begins when someone believes things can be mended. If you've stayed with them until this moment, and felt even a small warmth in your own winter, leave a comment below. Perhaps your story, too, once had a winter that quietly turned into spring. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can meet again in the gentle journeys of the West.